Welcome to episode 49 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast about people in Canadian theatre, featuring conversations with actors, directors, playwrights, stage managers, producers, and more. If you'd like to be a guest on Stageworthy or just want to drop me a line, you can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at stageworthypodcast.com. If you like the podcast, I hope you'll subscribe on iTunes or Google Music or whatever podcast app you use, and consider leaving a comment or rating. Michael Kras is a Hamilton-based playwright, actor, and director. This past summer, his play Dirty Girl was the winner of the Hamilton Fringe Audience Choice Award at the 2016 Hamilton Fringe. So you're a playwright from Hamilton.
I am, yeah.
And this summer I actually want to start with the Hamilton Fringe.
Yes.
The show that you did at Hamilton Fringe. And that was called...
Dirty Girl.
Dirty Girl.
Yeah.
Can you describe what that play was?
Oh boy, can I? It was so many things, but then it became a kind of a ghost story about Twitter. Became like a horror story about Twitter, and it started out as just this kind of teen drama about social media, and it just became... I just started turning Twitter into more and more of this like monstrous kind of creature or force, and so it basically two best friends are having a party in a basement together, just the two of them, and one of them discovers that a naked photo that they sent to their boyfriend has ended up on Twitter under a fake account. And they, of course, assume it's the boyfriend that posted it. And it kind of spirals out of control from there as I try to figure out who did it, if not the boyfriend, and why, and how to at least soften the storm that's headed their way.
Right. So you were saying that like, the way that you were telling the story sort of evolved over time, and your original starting point was just that Twitter was...
it just became... it was kind of just Twitter as Twitter, but it framed in the sort of mass public shamings we see so often on social media nowadays. Which was like... It was a big inspiration to read John Ronson's work as a journalist, because he talks about public shaming a lot, and just to see how huge it can go and how short of a time it can go in. And I wanted to apply that to a story I'd been exploring the year prior at the Fringe as a solo piece. And then it just kind of went crazy from there.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, if you're talking about Twitter in general, and your story features... two young women. Twitter is can be a brutal place for young women. Old women. It doesn't matter if you're a woman on Twitter; it can be a brutal place. You just have to look at what happened with Leslie Jones after the Ghostbusters came out, and the abuse that was just sort of like heaped on her. Forcing her to causing her to leave Twitter. Twitter can be a bit of a monster. So it's interesting that you sort of started taking it down sort of a horror movie sort of direction. Yeah,
the Leslie Jones thing, and her being a woman of color especially, that's making it doubly worse on her. And it did. Absolutely. And so the horror movie angle, like the fact that it turns into a monster, the monster, the way it manifested in the play is not that far removed from how it can be just like humans talking to humans. The only difference being that at a point it stops being this Twitter storm and trending topic, and Twitter itself morphs into this thing that can see and hear their every move, even when their phones are gone, even when all the technology it could come from is not there anymore. It just kind of hangs above their heads, literally, and terrorizes them and continues to do so.
It's interesting that you were doing this play at the Hamilton Fringe, and Fringe tends to skew younger generally.
than some of the more established theater companies. Generally, Fringe, in most places, goes a little bit younger because of the independent spirit. Your play seemed, from what I could tell, really resonated with that generation that so many theater companies are wrestling with trying to talk to millennials and people who are even much younger than the millennial generation. Was that something that you chased after, something that you were trying to speak to, or was it like a sort of a happy accident that it happened that way?
Oh no, that's fully what I always chase for with my work, especially in our evolving theater ecology, just kind of in Hamilton specifically, but really everywhere, where theater companies are noticing their audiences literally dying, and having to make adjustments. And I know a lot of theater companies for a while, in Toronto anyway, and probably surrounding areas, would try to engage younger people just by making it financially more accessible for them, so offering student rates and stuff, which will help if the teenagers you're trying to attract are already on the pulse of theater, right? It doesn't really make a difference unless they actually care about theater to begin with, but how do you then engage the people that don't care about theater yet or don't think it's for them?
Right.
And so that's kind of my mission as a creator in Hamilton and anywhere I work, I guess, is just how do I not only find that audience, but also tell a story that matters to them and is specifically for and about them.
So, I mean, just maybe some people might think it's a dumb question. How do you find that audience?
Yeah. It's part of it right now is that I'm fortunate to be pretty young myself, and therefore my personal networks and my networks and so on and so forth are about as young as my target audience.
Right.
And so promoting myself through social media channels and stuff, it ends up reaching those younger audiences. And I think it just comes down to how do you tap into the communities that these young people engage with? How do you make them think that this is something for them and something they actually want to see, as opposed to spending their money on something else? So it just, and telling a story that is directly for and about them, which so much theater that we expect young people to see isn't.
Well, that's one of those things that I think people are grappling with in both the indie scene and also just generally, is the whole idea that, okay, first off, everybody knows that they have to reach a younger audience, but generally what a lot of the larger theaters present is the same damn thing that they've been doing all along, that their aging subscriber base has been going to see. There's a couple of problems with that I see. First off, if you get young people into the building and they're looking around and they're seeing blue hairs, they're saying to themselves, apologies to the blue hairs, they've kept a lot of theaters going, but young people are looking around and say, this is not for me.
Right, yeah.
And also, how many times can you see Hamlet or The Importance of Being Earnest? Not that some of the bigger theaters are doing that, but there comes a time when throwing the same, every year when Stratford is giving us either Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, or Hamlet, how many times can we have that? So approaching it in a different way is kind of important, and yet how do you expect a company where the people at the top are still the same people that were speaking to that older group to be able to talk to a younger group?
It's a lot of it, and this is speaking as someone who works administratively and artistically at Hamilton's Regional Theatre, where they do, a lot of their season is programmed with sort of a wide mainstream audience in mind. And that's, totally for the life of the theater at this point. And it's worth mentioning that a lot of these theaters, it feels as though a lot of the theaters, at least at this point, are trying to kind of slowly warm the bathwater. So none of them are going to immediately program a new season that's all completely different work for a different audience. But even the theater I work at, it every season there's one or two shows that are a bit more edgy, a bit more challenging, maybe a bit more tangible or accessible to a younger audience or a more culturally, contemporarily savvy audience. So there's that.
But does that actually bring that younger audience in?
That's the, it's tricky. The work itself might, because how do they know it's necessarily for them?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, a theater company, promotionally speaking, it doesn't really serve you to say this is a play for you explicitly, because they're going to go, yeah, sure. And,
of course they are.
Yeah.
Because you're the same company that's been doing, Romeo and Juliet for the past 3 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're the company that's doing the same old stuff that I'm not interested in. Now you're telling me this is for me?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky, multifaceted question and multifaceted problem that I see, different companies trying different things out, and some being far more aggressive about it than others, a bit more experimental. This might not exactly apply, but even just the steps taken by Factory Theatre with their incoming season, it's a completely... it's a whole different... Like, the entire season is of non-white creators, and so that's surprisingly something we never see.
Well, it's so rare to see that. Not just non-white creators, but I mean, it's the season programmed by a white male, full of white males, both on stage and in the writing, and that's something that a lot of theaters have justifiably been taken to task for. Yeah,
it's a thing. I mean, I'll speak from my own experience of doing Dirty Girl specifically, because I've listened to the podcast before, and I heard the Fringe Roundtable, and I heard my play talked about a fair bit, and Brian Morton, I think it was talking about the play's evolution from a solo piece that I performed the year prior that ticket sales wise didn't do well at all, and that was just because I couldn't figure out how to sell it to the audience that I needed to sell it to. And an older audience felt detached from the work in a way, or felt because the work, for all the things it tackled, a big part of the story was also a child porn investigation, and so a lot of people were kind of weirded out by that, understandably so. The play wasn't creepy about it, it wasn't exploitative about it, but people had no reason to believe anything else, and they just see the words child porn and they go, I'm not going to see that. Exactly. That's a dangerous. And then the same thing kind of happened for young people, where we didn't succeed in making it sound like something exciting and something at least genre-wise that they could engage with. I think turning Dirty Girl into a genre piece, I think inherently made it more interesting to people. Just the horror angle of it made people go like, oh, this is interesting.
See, what's interesting is that having been around the Hamilton Fringe Festival while this was going on, I don't think I was aware of the horror aspect from what I was seeing. Was that something that you were sort of keeping like for a word of mouth thing, or was did I miss something? We weren't explicit about the horror, because I also, it was this tricky balance of not wanting to people to expect that we were doing something blatantly in the horror genre, because it was a horror play in the same way that the works of someone like Annie Baker, I know, has played a lot with this kind of pseudo horror, where the play itself is not a horror, but there are elements that can be taken as metaphor or taken as something realistic and happening to them in their literal world, and sort of dropping things in. So there were no like blood and guts in the play. The monster never manifests itself physically per se. So at its core, it really is just a more it's a drama with these horror elements kind of propelling it forward into something even more intense. And so I dropped the word horror a lot because it was intriguing and not incorrect, but I also didn't really use it super aggressively because I didn't want to build expectations that we weren't going to meet. So it was billed as a techno horror story. And we didn't do much more beyond that. It's interesting about it's kind of important not to tell everybody everything about your show. Otherwise, it loses the hook. And I was very thankful that with my show at Hamilton this year, that people who reviewed it didn't give away too much.
Right.
So that the humorous angle of the atheist who's chosen by God to deliver his new commandment doesn't get. People don't know that there's a punch in the gut twist at the end that sort of changes it, so that people come in expecting this weird quirky comedy, and they get something that's a little heavier. Right. It sounds like with Dirty Girl, people came in with maybe the vaguest sense that there was something horror, but like hearing your description without knowing that like Twitter sort of becomes this monster within it. I just think that it's the horror of like having the world of Twitter turn on you rather than Twitter itself. Yeah,
which it is for most of it, and then it just keeps upping itself and upping itself and upping itself, and it just becomes this relentless thing where you think it goes about as far as it could go, and then it goes further than that. So that was what we were trying to sort of capitalize on, were the elements of like you think you know where the story is going to go, but it's going to go even further than you think.
And this isn't your first Hamilton Fringe that you've been a part of. No. How long have you been participating in Fringe?
I think this was my 4th year as an artist.
Cool. And before that, were you an audience member, or did you just come in as an artist?
Occasionally I was. I think in my sort of pre-theatre school days, I didn't get to see a whole lot of Hamilton Fringe. And then when I was in my year about to go into theatre school, I attended as a community reviewer. They would recruit community members to review shows, which was interesting. So I got to see a lot that way. And then the next year I submitted a play I had written a year prior for the Sears Drama Festival, and kind of reimagined it, and did really well, I think, which kept us coming back. Because for a first timer, and especially for people that were just kind of young across the board, not many of us topped 20 years old, and the show did really well. It won Best of Fringe that year, so it was kind of a nice way to start, and that's a big part of what's kept me coming back since.
There are a number of people that I saw with shows this year that skewed quite young as far as the Fringe went in Hamilton. It was really good to see that Fringe was attracting artists that were sort of on the lower end of 20 and working that way. I mean, it also, of course, always it's a lottery, so it attracts people from the whole spectrum. But it's always interesting to see the age range of the artists, and sort of, I think that says a little bit about the place where the Fringe is happening.
I think so, yeah, and I think it says a lot as well about how the theater scene in Hamilton is changing, because 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't say I would have returned after theatre school, because I studied here in Toronto, as most people. I went to Humber College,
okay, cool.
So I studied physical theatre there, and my whole idea with that was I'm not going back to Hamilton afterwards. I'm like, the theatre scene in Toronto is huge.
Yes,
there are actual shots at a career here for me, and all the people I had known to go to theatre school were like, they'd left Hamilton and stayed in Toronto after leaving their conservatory, and so that was going to be my plan too. But then, after participating in the Fringes every summer in between years of school, and just seeing like, okay, things are kind of growing at a decently rapid rate. Like, the second year that I did Fringe, I think nearly doubled its attendance, and then of course this year shattered attendance records for the Fringe as a whole. So it is continually growing, and I think the arts as a kind of general unit are becoming this huge thing in Hamilton, and the community's really, really embracing it in a way that wasn't evident before.
Yeah. What about theater outside of Fringe in Hamilton? Because of course I only know the scene in Hamilton during Fringe, having been there this summer. So what is the theater scene like in Hamilton when Fringe isn't happening?
It's small and in a lot of ways problematic. I think the Fringe is kind of the peak of the year from a theater perspective, especially from my perspective in terms of people getting to develop new work on a public and pretty well attended platform.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, there's really not a lot of routes to go in the city at this point towards new play development. Theatre Aquarius has its playwrights unit, which I'm a part of, but other than that, and there have been a couple of initiatives that have popped up and haven't really continued since their inception. So it's this constant battle of needing a platform to develop new work in a supported way, because unless you are really driven and independent and have producing savvy, which, I mean, I had to learn that really, really fast to do my own work in the Fringe, which I've done every single year with limited resources, which a lot of people have to do, especially in Hamilton, where it's, I'd like to see more of it. I'd like to be part of creating more of it in the city as well.
In an ideal world, like what if you could pull out any solution that you can think of, what do you think would need to happen in Hamilton to make that happen?
I think there's this weird, and this is not a general truth of the city, but not a ton of people at this stage anyway apply for grants or for funding for their work, whether that's the fact that they don't know how or that maybe things get in the way, but it can be, I don't often see Arts Council funded work happen in the city outside of Theatre Aquarius, or the odd thing that does pop up here and there. And that's the thing, like, I remember going to a grant writing session where we were told as a group, because of Hamilton the way it is and Toronto the way it is, if a Hamilton artist and a Toronto artist were to each submit a grant application of equal heft, the jury would be more likely to choose the Hamilton grant over the Toronto grant.
I was about to say, actually, because if you're looking, I don't know about the Canada Council, but Ontario Council is very much interested in supporting stuff that's not from Toronto.
Yes.
Bad news for me, good news for other people, but you have to ask for it.
Yes.
What do you like? So, if people were to apply for grants, are you thinking playwriting grants, development grants? I don't know. Since I don't know the scene outside of Toronto, I know what I would do here in Hamilton. Like, if you had your preferred, like, what would you love to see happen for you in terms if everything was to fall into place?
Right. I would love to see a professionally funded playwriting development initiative, maybe some kind of festival or series where the artists involved could also reap professional benefits, which I think is very important and doesn't happen as often as it should in Hamilton anyway, and supports the work of new voices who don't hear themselves on stages. I mean, Hamilton is full of community theaters and community theater groups.
Yes.
The problem with those groups is, of course, I understand they have to stay afloat, but there is a tendency, again, to program the same old kind of stuff. Of and it's rare to see a community theater, I think, in a lot of places, to program a new work by a new voice, especially a local voice. So while there are a lot of really successful, booming community theaters, I mean, Hamilton hosts the oldest living community theater in, I think, North America, and it's become a staple of the city. But I'd love to see more, even like community initiatives. And the Players Guild did have a play development initiative called First Stage that my dramaturg Stephen Neer was sort of the pilot of. And I hope to see that return. It's kind of taken a hiatus, I believe, but it seemed to be a great thing and a great step in that direction.
I think that the scene that I saw is the kind of thing that I think if somebody was to come in and do a storefront style theater there, they could really tear things up.
Yes.
Like, just somebody who could, if you could take the Toronto storefront model and like move it into Hamilton and program a lot of Hamilton playwrights and things like that, you could really be transformative in that city, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of young artists have been talking about such an initiative. I mean, it's in ridiculously early stages of discussion, but there is a very passionate group of young artists and creators in the city who are frustrated by the lack of opportunities available to them and the lack of a sustainable... I mean, there are numerous routes through which to program your work. You've got the Fringe. You can always, if you can get the resources, independently program your work, but there's no way to make any semblance of a living, or even like a respectable portion of a living, doing theater in the city. So I'd like to see some initiatives or some programs or some kind of establishment that can offer the professional artist living in the city with professional interests something that helps make their career sustainable in Hamilton. Because a lot of artists, myself included, we're finding that a lot of our professional opportunities are coming externally from places like Toronto. And I find myself having to get my foot in the door in Toronto theaters, and because that's kind of where I'm at.
It's interesting because, if you're talking about a group of people who are talking about this sort of thing, that's probably a great way to do it would be to have an umbrella organization that sort of like was a group of theater professionals just to get together on a project like a storefront theater. It's probably the way that I could see that succeeding, even if aside from the two that I know of in Toronto, the Red Sandcastle and the storefront, though I think that groups of artists have a really good chance of like putting those sorts of things together. Where, just to come away from just the Hamilton scene and Fringe for a second, thinking back, when did you first start being interested in participating in theater, or like see that as something that you wanted to do?
I mean, performance and being the center of attention has always been a thing since childhood. I think I only realized my love of theater specifically when I was in my later years of high school. I took drama classes throughout, like, even my early years of high school, grade 9 and 10. I think grade 9, I failed or came close to failing drama. I think I left with like a 50% or a 58% or something, and I did not do very well. Which then, fast forward 3 years at my school, I was writing and directing our Sears Drama Festival plays, and it became this thing where I'm like, this is... And I enjoyed being in a leadership role with it as well. I enjoyed kind of taking the reins and guiding a project towards something and collaborating on it with others who were just as passionate about what we were doing as I was. And after that, I think it just kept growing, and then I went to Humber and had my world changed there, as so many people do in their theater schools. And the rest is kind of history.
Do you know what changed for you between that first year in drama class where you almost failed and after that?
Yes. I've always been, whether or not my heart was in drama class all throughout, my heart was always in performing, specifically as a magician. I was a magician first. And so at my high school, I had a reputation for that, and it was a thing that I did constantly, and I'd entertain in the halls, and I even had like a YouTube series, which was like David Blaine style, where I'd walk through the halls and film myself doing magic for people. So that was kind of my claim to fame. And then by the time, I think I was in grade 11 when Sears Drama Festival auditions were going to happen, and I was interested in that. And I had been encouraged, once people found that I wanted to audition, I was encouraged to bring some magic to my audition. And they were thinking, like, because the play was very fantastical, they said, like, we'd love to maybe see if you could do some, like, cool transitional stuff for the play and just come out, do magic between scenes or something. They were kind of working on this thing. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So I went to the audition. I brought no magic. I brought a monologue, and I ended up getting a lead in that play. And the experience of working with this small but committed team, because Sears Festival while it can be a very political thing, is also, it really kind of pushes a drive in those who really care about it. So every year I did Sears after that, I was like, it was go time around Sears time, and I was like sick to my stomach all week, which I still am with everything I do.
Of course.
Oh man. But Sears was really the launching point, and it gave theater a sense of greater purpose in my mind. Even though it's framed as a competition, and that's kind of weird, there's still this like, we're recognizing those who perform excellently. We want to acknowledge people who are doing good work and encouraging them. So I remember, I think it was my final year of Sears, and the play that I ended up bringing to the Fringe my first year. It was, looking back, a very ambitious piece for a 17-year-old to write. It had a cast of 13, and each person kind of had, some were more thinly drawn than others, but everyone had their own agency and had their own narrative arc in this piece. So it was kind of it was a huge undertaking, and I'm not sure I could do it now. I'm not sure I'm as audacious as I was. But we did the piece, and then our adjudicator, who is a pretty notable dramaturg, before the big adjudication that happens at the end of the week, we're all sitting in anticipation, and then someone walks on stage and says that the adjudicator would like to see all of the student playwrights in the lecture room. So we all go, okay, and we go to the lecture room, and we sit there, and the adjudicator comes in with a big stack of all of our scripts on his lap, and he just picks each one of them and kind of just goes through and points out specific things and says, like, you don't need this whole page. This whole page is garbage. You don't need it. Do you know why did you write this? Why is this way? And he just basically brutally dissected all of our work, and we're all kind of sitting there blindsided. And I left that. I think part of me felt kind of crushed by it, but I think a bigger part of me respected it a great deal. Because
I think not everybody would do that. I mean, especially when you're not expecting it. If that's not part of the standard,
it's not.
And that happens, that is a blindsiding. Yeah.
I had done Sears for 2 years prior to that, and we had never had anything like that. It was remarkably unusual. And so having that happen was like, whoa, like what was... And he would praise certain elements of what we'd created, and then he would just rip apart other elements of what we'd created, and he didn't pull any punches. And I'm thankful for it, because I was working on other work at the time, and it forced me to go to that work and do some pretty drastic things to it that I might not have thought to or known to do, unless he had said, like, he taught me the importance of cutting. And I had to learn to fall out of love with so much I had written and say, this isn't necessary, let's get rid of it.
I think that Fringe helps with that a lot of times, if you're in the 60-minute category.
Yes.
I've seen a lot of shows that are in the 90-minute category that could be in the 60-minute category. I've almost never seen a show at 90 minutes that needed to be.
It was justifiably 90 minutes long.
Almost never.
Almost never. I'm in the same boat,
So very, very rare that happens. And the 60-minute category can really force you to sit there and brutally decide, what do I need? And most shows benefit from cutting. Most shows benefit from taking. If you really love something, I've heard, and this is the hardest thing I've found to do. I've heard, if you really love this sentence, this phrase, this paragraph, take it out. Because it's probably there because you really love it.
That's a good way of putting it.
So you went to Humber.
Yes.
Was Humber your first choice for schools?
No, not even close.
Okay. let's talk theater schools.
Let's talk theater schools. I had always envisioned myself going to a place that was more text-based, more or less because of my love of text and my passion for playwriting and for words. And I was going to study acting because I love acting and I love, but I likely would have studied playwriting had there been more accessible avenues for it. It's like National Theatre School or bust, right?
No, absolutely.
And then if you're not one of two students,
that's a serious problem. There's the devised program at York.
Yes,
but aside from that, and National Theatre School, nobody else is touching playwriting.
No, it's a minor in you can take it as like an extra thing, if anything else.
Yeah.
It's like a small part of a creative writing course at best.
Yes.
So that's been a trouble. It's like if you're not one of the 2 students accepted into NTS every year, then what do you do? And so I thought George Brown and its focus on sort of text-based classical work and training people classically would be a good fit for me. And the audition scared me out of my mind.
When you auditioned, were they at the Young Center or was it pre-Young Center? Okay.
It was at the Young Center. And so I remember walking into a big room with a bunch of people who said nothing to me.
Okay.
I stood on an X about like 30 feet away from them.
Okay.
Like a whole ocean between us. I just walked in, said my name, said the name of my first piece, did my first piece, said the name of the second piece, did that, did like 7 seconds of my song before they cut me off, and then I walked out.
Did nobody talk to you?
Not really, no. I think they might have said hello. But
The audition process, when I auditioned for George Brown, we were this is before the Young Center was ever a glint in anybody's eye. We were in a small warehouse at King and River Street in Toronto.
Okay.
And we went into one of the studios there. We went as a group, and they spoke to us all. Peter Wilder was the head of acting at the time, gave us all the "No one wants you" speech.
Oh man!
Which everybody gets, which is the "Nobody wants you because actors are a dime a dozen. If you can do anything else, leave now, go do that."
Right. We were told that. I
Yes.
mean, not in those exact words, but I remember being told before things got underway, they were like, "This is what we train actors to do. This is what we want out of an actor. If this doesn't sound like your idea of acting or of theater, you can leave now. We'll refund your audition fee, and you can go." And then no one left.
Of course,
and then
because whenever I know when I was getting the "Nobody wants you" speech, I was like, "Fuck you, they want me."
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that everybody who goes to that particular speech is thinking basically the same thing. We got an interview after our audition.
We did if we were lucky. Okay. I didn't get that far. They think they kept they had a group of maybe between 15 and 20 of us that day, and they came in and said, "We want to see you and you. Everyone else can go." So it was like most of us were sent home, and then there were like 2 or 3 that got to stay and talk to them some more. So it was a very short-lived experience.
It's probable that George Brown, I think, has a reputation now that it didn't have. That it was only starting to get when I was there, which was it produces actors who can deal with text. It produces actors that go on and do stuff, things like that. It had a certain reputation. It was developing that at the time, and I think maybe now it has more of that.
Yeah.
Were there other schools that you looked at aside from George Brown?
It was between George Brown and Humber at that point. I think it was because I decided to apply so late in the game. I had already taken an extra year of school because I didn't feel prepared enough to leave just yet, or to at least to go to a post-secondary institution. So at that point, I think it was just kind of colleges that were left.
Yeah.
And George Brown was one, and then I saw Humber, and that's where my dad went for something else completely.
Yeah.
But so I was like, yeah, why not? I might as well. I'm paying $60 to apply to these schools, so I might as well just toss that one in. And then I went, and there was something about it where I was like, oh, this is like... Because it's such a diverse training program, in many ways, especially now, where a lot of the students emerge. It's a very diverse group of actors that they pull in every year now, too. But even just what is taught and how it's taught, like... it kind of runs the gamut. I mean, there's that, we have that solid, rigorous classical training in text, and we also had very European avant-garde physical theater style training, and basically the whole program was framed as, some classes are not going to resonate with you at all, we're sure, and you will take what you get from everything you take, from all the classes you take. And if things resonate with you, then these will be tools in your bag. And if not, it's only a semester at most. So just, learn what you can from it and let it go if you don't think you need it. So it was a great environment to kind of... They gave you building blocks, and you got to build the kind of actor that you wanted to be and the kind of actor that you were kind of meant to be as a human being, I guess.
Is the Humber program a conservatory program?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think by the time I had started, it had only been for maybe just over a decade. Only then had the training really adapted into what it is now, where we were told that before us, and maybe about 10 years before us, the program was just kind of this like mishmash of stuff, and it didn't know what it wanted to be, and people were leaving and not getting hired anywhere, and so it became what it is today, and it's become a very strong training program that's training brilliant artists that are doing amazing things, and it's constantly in flux. That's one of the beautiful things about it is I could go up to someone who's planning to go to Humber, like a few of my friends are starting there in first year now, and I could try to tell you what you're going to do, but I don't honestly know because it changes every year. Like we had programs that we were like the pilot class to try. Like we were the first class to do the Theatre for Young Audiences project, which I think is probably one of, if not the most valuable project that Humber does, and I think that they should always keep it because I think we all learned immensely from doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I remember performing for like we would do a children's show when I was at George Brown. And we would do that around Christmas, which is when you do that.
Is it the Robert Munch thing still, or was it different?
It was different then. We would do a different one. At that time, there was a different show each year. And fuck, kids are hard.
Yeah,
like they will not. You cannot bullshit.
Yeah,
you cannot bullshit a child audience.
Yeah, we did 14-year-olds. That was, and before we had started doing TYA, we didn't really know what it was. We all had our preconceptions of, oh my God, we're doing children's theater, which isn't actually what it ended up being. We were guided by Mary Beth Badian, who has a lot of experience doing theater for young audiences, and she's like, we're going to do a piece for high schoolers. And we're like, oh, okay. So then we started reading plays like Hannah Moskovich's In This World and Misha by Adam Peddle, things meant for kind of a more adolescent or high school age audience. And we would read them as a class for our 2-week intensive at the start, and the profound effect those plays had on people in the class in ways that I had never personally seen any other work do to anybody. Like, it was the connection to that material, even though so many of us were so far, because we also read some that were intended for 5-year-olds or and the effect they had on us, we're like, wow, this is powerful stuff, and it's not at all what we thought it was. And then we dove into creating this piece for 14-year-olds, which was informed by actually we did a tour to high schools throughout the Toronto area, and we as we were creating the show, we went to those schools and did drama workshops with the kids who were going to be seeing our show. And those were also a way for us to observe them in their kind of natural element, and just watching them behave the way they behave. And the kids who were too cool to participate in the drama games and would stand off to the side, or the kids, because it was just a constant battle of status all the time. We played the game. Do you know the game Adam? You're all walking around the room and someone screams Adam and then a number like Adam 4, and 4 of you have to grab and link arms or just hold on to each other, and if there are people left over, they're out. Right. So there are different versions of this game, but we played that version, and at the closer to the end, it was Adam 2, and I think there were enough of us that everyone could grab someone, and then this one young boy tried to grab another young boy by the arm, and the other boy pulled away and said, "I'd rather be out than touch you." Yo! Woo! And we all had to just stand there and observe. We couldn't be like, whoa! We just had to be quiet about it. But it was like, ooh, these kids are brutal. Yeah. It was insane. And it later flipped, because then that same group of kids came to our turf. So for another session, they came to Humber. And then they were totally different. They were watching it. They were in our school, and their dynamic was totally different. And they kind of sat in and just watched us do ensemble work and kind of rehearse a little bit. And they were just kind of in awe of what we were doing and how we were doing it. And then they all left. And this one kid, who was, I think, one of the quote-unquote cool kids, he kind of ran back after his whole group was leaving and just stood there and beamed about what we were doing. He was like, how do you guys get into this school? What is this? Is amazing. You have so much fun. This is incredible. And it's not something he would say in front of his friends. He had to wait until everyone was gone,
Yeah.
and then he just gushed to us,
Yeah.
which was really amazing.
Huh.
It was a very fulfilling way to work, and that's what informed the way I write now. I write for young people.
To get those audiences, those kids into theater, and not the kind of theater that we tend to send them to.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if they're in high school, the kind of theater they're going to see is they are probably going to read a Shakespeare that they don't want to read, taught by somebody who doesn't know how to perform Shakespeare,
yes.
and makes them read it like literature. And then they are forced to go and see that play
Yeah.
that they already hate because they're being forced to read it by somebody who doesn't know how to perform it. And they're not going to enjoy it, rather than getting them in to see theater that would speak to them or be interesting to them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's huge, and that's why I love touring companies like Roseneath and companies like YPT, who, along with their works for younger kids, they also program or tour works that are meant for an older audience. And I've been able to see some of these and go like, wow, like every kid this age needs to see this play, because it's bold and provocative and really pushes the boundaries. Like, I could see a young person watching this play and being just drawn in by the fact that it almost feels like something they shouldn't be watching,
right?
Because it just and just even reading some of these works, not having seen them staged, I'm like, wow, like I can only imagine what a young audience would think of this. Like, In This World by Hannah Moscovich is a big example of that. You can tell in the play, it's about like just under an hour long, and you can tell at kind of like the halfway point of the play where the kids are going to kind of do a 180, where you can imagine them kind of laughing at the scenario, and then you can tell on the line, you can tell where they're going to flip and be like, oh, this is which is why I love that play and why I love writing provocative plays for young people.
When you're I want to sort of to break down a little bit about writing provocative plays for young people. How do you? I mean, I'm 46 years old, so writing play. I feel like for me, writing plays for young people is I don't know if that's not where my brain goes. I'm not young enough. I think I would have to do a lot of research and get somebody to help me. But which is of course a problem that a lot of theaters have when they're trying to talk to younger audiences. In terms of when you're writing something that's intended for a young audience, you're trying to write something that's provocative to that young audience. Can you do that without offending their parents?
It's yes, I think. Or
do you have to make them promise before they see the play that they won't tell their parents about anything they've seen that day?
It's a weird. I mean, from Dirty Girl specifically, when I did that play, it was more or less a challenge to myself as a playwright, but it kind of, I think it made the play better to not have really aggressive swearing in it. I've written plays that are more profane. Dirty Girl, there was not one fuck in Dirty Girl.
Okay.
There was not one shit. Like, it was a pretty clean play by those standards. I still had offended parents who were offended by the use of the word slut, because it's used a lot in the play.
Right.
So I was like, I didn't really think of that as a thing that could make you mad to hear. But
you know, the thing is that I don't know if you could write that topic about Twitter and about a picture of a girl naked that's shared on Twitter. I don't think you can do that without using the word slut.
And not at all. Yeah,
be truthful to your premise and your topic.
Yeah, it's and it's an important word. And it was important that it was in the play, and it wasn't there to be gratuitous, and it was there for a very specific purpose. And I think if you were to write a play for a young audience and so obviously withhold language like that, where we know in their world it would be, they're going to call bullshit right away.
They're going to call bullshit,
and they're going to disengage. And so it was a difficult play to write, because not only was I writing from the voice of young people, but from young women.
Yes,
and I'm not a woman.
No.
I haven't lived that experience. So it required a lot of research. Reading was important. The most important thing was talking to young people, young women, and I was grateful to have young women open up about experiences, not unlike what happens in the play, not to that extreme, but dealing with that culture, and even like giving drafts of scenes to young people, young women, and going like, read this, call out my bullshit, please. And they would say like, yeah, my friends and I would never say this. And it requires you to put a lot of your ego aside as a playwright. It requires a lot more work, but it paid off, because when we did the play, I got a Facebook message from someone who saw it, who has a daughter, not a daughter, a sister who is the age of the girls in the play, who came to see the show and said that they were happy to see a play where teenagers actually sound like teenagers and not what someone thinks they sound like. So that was a really, it was a lot harder to pull that off than I think it sounded, because the dialogue that I write generally is very messy and very frenetic, and so it was there's a lot more effort in it than it seems, and it paid off, because you would see, especially young women, would grab onto this play. And there was one performance of it where, weirdly, there was like just 30, 50-year-old men there. Like, there weren't really any young people at one performance of the show, and they were like dead quiet the whole show. And not in like an engaged way. They were like, "What the hell? Like, this is shit." And it was a rough run of the show. And I left feeling miserable. I'm like, oh, they hate. None of the jokes landed.
No, of course not.
None of the really provocative stuff landed or resonated with them either. And you could there was a restlessness in the theater where I was like, ooh, this is painful to sit through. And for a second, or for a night, I guess, you feel kind of awful about your work, and then you go, but it's not for you. This isn't a play about you. It's not for you. And so there were of course a lot of people who are outside the demographic of the play who connected with or appreciated or were affected by the play. A lot of parents saw it and were affected by the play for whole different reasons. And there was a performance too where there were these two youngish girls who I didn't know, sitting in the very front row of the staircase. I sat at the back usually, and so about like 2/3 of the way through the play, maybe 3/4, I saw them like slumping down in their seats and just kind of like hidden away, and they looked like they were just lethargic. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, this is like, at least pretend you're enjoying it or something. I'm sitting here too, but I'm like, hey, if it's not engaging with them, then it's not engaging with them. And I found out afterwards, like we were striking the set, and my actors were like, did you see those girls like crying in the front row? And I was like, I thought they were like sleeping, not crying. And so they were the opposite. They were like, and they were friends, so they were both like getting down low to sort of get closer to each other. And they were, because they were in closer proximity to the actors than I was, the actors could hear them like whispering things, and kind of like whispering like, no, don't do that, no. Like they were, as if they were trying to will the actors to do something different. So it was a completely opposite thing, and I was like, wow, like. That, and so the reaction out of young people, the ones that did come see it, like that,
that's good. That's good. Sometimes I wonder if we're just, again, it goes back to, we got to stop doing the same old thing to try to, we can't entice young people in with the same old.
No, it goes two ways too. By programming new work by new voices, we're not only opening up the doors to new audiences, but we're also opening up doors for those new voices to get on those stages.
We're also opening the door, the experience of the people who would be coming anyway, like the theater people that who are
broadening their perspectives. And it can be tough. Like it's that kind of warming of the bathwater that I was talking about. Where I know one of the plays that Theatre Aquarius programmed, it was their co-pro with Can Stage. They did Tribes, which is a very profane play, and they did that as part of their season. And I recall stories of a lot of walkouts during that show, because the usual Aquarius audience couldn't really handle the profanity of it and were offended by it. And so it takes some climatization. It's not going to be immediate, but the more I see classics programmed and they're still a valid part of our theater ecology, I want to see them a lot less. And I want to see bigger platforms open up for new emerging voices, so they too can have a chance of being canonized like Shakespeare.
Yes.
Or like the playwrights that we hold on a pedestal now. Why do we just keep giving them the biggest platforms? And there are voices that are saying something about the world right now who are kind of getting pushed aside.
We need to make a space for the next Judith Thompson and the next Danielle McIver and the next Brad Fraser and the next whoever.
Yeah.
Because those people have their place, but new stuff happens too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're about at the end of our time, so I want to thank you for coming on and talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is great.